by Dr. Sonia Mastrangelo, Associate Professor at Lakehead University. Lecture topic, the how-to of self-regulation for children on the autism spectrum. Possibilities and opportunities within the Miller method.
We've been sitting for quite some time, and we just talked about focus and attention, and sometimes it is challenging to sit for a long period of time to listen. Well, good morning. My name is Sonia Mastrangelo. I'm from Canada, and I'm very grateful to be in Bahrain. This is my 4th visit to the country. A special thanks to Dr. Rania Khalifa for the invitation. I've had the pleasure of spending time with the children and families at Alia Intervention, and it really has been a gift for me, and such a wonderful experience getting to know the teachers who are working so diligently with the students, and to be involved in their programming. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Today I'm going to take you through a journey of self-regulation and the work that we're doing in Canada around the importance of recognizing arousal states and the effects of stress. Much of what I'll speak about echoes the work of Dr. Brown that was shared so beautifully this morning, and I'm going to try to contextualize it within an educational framework. I will save some time at the end for questions. I'd like to dedicate this presentation to the families in the audience, because really without you, we have no reciprocal relationship. You are our first source of information, and really you are the primary person in the child's life. I was fortunate enough to do my PhD dissertation on family quality of life and raising a child with autism. And what I found time and time again is that the families really informed the practices that the teachers were engaged in the school. So keeping those open lines of communication with the school, extremely important. So thank you to you. Just a little introduction and background. I'm a former special education teacher with the Dufferin Peel Board, a very small board just outside of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I am a certified Miller Method therapist. I've been in the autism field for just about 20 years now, and have spent several years working with this cognitive developmental approach. With success. Have all the children been successful with this treatment approach? They haven't. What we've discovered is actually children with seizures have shown the least promise with this approach, in particular children with Rett syndrome. Internationally, I've been consulting in schools and in speech and language clinics, and I'm currently an associate professor in the Faculty of Education in Aurelia, Ontario. I'm going to start off with a couple of stories, just to set the stage this morning. My first introduction to autism was at a very young age, when my mother took in a child with autism. We were living in downtown Toronto, a very multicultural city, and a newly immigrated family from Italy knocked on my mother's door, and they came with little Enzo, and the mother was in tears, and she said to my mother, "I've been to 3 daycares, and no one will take my son with autism. I understand that you provide in-home daycare. Will you take my son?" And I was several years older than Enzo at the time. I was probably 9 or 10. And I remember seeing this curious, fascinating little boy at the doorstep. And I thought, how wonderful. He had picked up the newspaper that was on our front porch and began reading it. He was hyperlexic at the age of 4. And I had an older sister at the time, so that curiosity of having a young boy in the home really, really intrigued me. So I was so grateful when my mom said, "Well, absolutely, I'll take Enzo. I would be thrilled to care for him before and after school." So this was my first introduction to this fascinating world of autism. And watching my mother work tirelessly, trying to get him to taste new foods, trying to calm him down through his tantrums, really helping him transition when he stepped on that bus. And I had this inquisitive mind, and I was always trying new techniques. What could I do to get him to engage? I tried almost every single game. And so he was with our family for almost 5 years, and that was really that first introduction. The next story I want to share with you is a child with autism that I began working with at the age of 6 in my first career, which was as a special education teacher. His name is Harrison, and the reason I share this story is that Harrison is now 26, and I still work with him on Mondays. This, I guess, in the academic world, we can say longitudinally. I have followed him in a case study approach in a very qualitative way. But he began with me at the age of 6, he's now 26, and I see him every Monday. And parents will sometimes say to me, Sonia, what has made the difference? You know, you've tracked him for 20 years. What are some of the things you can tell us? It's been, 2 decades of time with this individual. What I can say is that he certainly has taught me more than I think I've ever taught him. So that's the first gift of, we talk about reciprocal learning, but I really believe this population teaches us so much about ourselves as people. The other thing I want to say is that his intervention was always multiple therapies at once. This family, did everything from DIR floor time, ABA. In Ontario, we call it IBI, Intensive Behavioral Intervention. They brought me on board as the Miller Method therapist. He went through vitamin therapies, the Will Barger protocol, massage therapies. He went through a whole slew, vitamin therapies, cranial, sacral, on and on and on. But they were always done at the same time. He would begin something and then a few days later there was something else. They pretty much believed in a multidisciplinary approach to treatment. So I can't say for sure what worked and what didn't, but we continued full force ahead with multiple things. The other thing I want to share with you is that the restricted interests, what we like to say in academia are restricted interests, but which really are the interests and the passions of that child, remained the same. When I met him as a 6-year-old boy, he had 2 passions, 2 interests, Disney and animals. On Mondays, when I see him, a large portion of his programming has to do with animals and Disney. So more recently, I've been working with him to integrate the 2, and I've got the plans underway to take him to Burbank, California, to the Disney Animation Studios to meet the creators of Zootopia, who've worked really, really hard at creating this wonderful Disney animated story about animals. This is when I really feel he's connected. He's passionate about what he's learning, he's reading, he's speaking, he's communicating. As soon as I bring my interests or the interests of, the grade 7 math book into that context, I lose his focus. I no longer have eye contact. I see some of the self-stimulatory behaviors start. I see frustration and anxiety. So the long and short of it is, those interests that you see may continue with that individual over a long period of time. The other thing I want to share is that the focus has changed. The focus now for him is on sustainable housing. We're partnering with Habitat for Humanity to build residential settings for individuals on the autism spectrum. And I'm on a board of directors. We're piloting this work. We're very excited to have Habitat on board because we're looking at long-term residential, self-sustaining housing for this population. The other thing I want to mention, living in Canada, it's cold. My husband texted me and said there's a major storm. Just yesterday, we got another 10 centimeters, and we are in the month of April. What does this mean for our children with autism? The winter months are long. They're not getting a lot of sunlight. They're spending a lot of time indoors, lack of vitamin D, and much of what Dr. Brown just spoke about. What I have found is very important is to bundle up with very great Canada Goose coats and to spend time outdoors with him. Hiking, biking in the summer and spring, but in the winter, snowshoeing, really trying to incorporate movement and winter sports. It's a reality. We live in a cold climate. We have to adapt and adjust. So rather than keeping him indoors for those months, we've moved his programming, a large chunk of it, outdoors. He resisted and protested at first, but he's come a long way. When he is outdoors, I certainly see sustained attention when he's moving. The other thing I want to mention, and I should mention, one thing I forgot to say, is that seasonal affective disorder is quite high in my area. I talked to my family doctor about this, and she said, you know, we don't have many hours of daylight, and so this is a problem, and she has been prescribing extensively for depression. So time outdoors and movement has been key. I'm going to take you through the agenda for this morning. I'm going to talk about the literature very briefly on self-regulation and what it means for our children on the autism spectrum, why it's important in the development of kids with ASD, and how do we promote self-regulation in young kids at home and at school using an intervention such as the Miller method. But the self-regulation skills that I'll talk about can really be applied to any methodology or any treatment. So people often ask me, what is self-regulation? How do you develop it? You know, is it something you're born with? Can you develop it if you don't have it? And I'll begin with two stories pertaining to myself. Our springtime in Canada is also very rainy, lots of precipitation. And I remember as a child, every day, my mother would give me a verbal reminder, Sonia, bring your umbrella, it looks like rain today. And I never really synthesized what she was saying. It was a frenetic mornings, and I would get myself ready, bolt out the door, and I would always forget my umbrella. Until one day there was a torrential downpour, and I was walking to school, and by the time I got to school, I was drenched, I was soaked. The smell of the rain, that feeling of wet clothes, was enough for me. It hit my sensory system that I never forgot my umbrella again. The verbal reminders from my mother were not enough. I had to experience that feeling of being wet, that musty smell of rain on the skin, for me to realize I need to be prepared for next time, because that was an aversive. I didn't like feeling that way. I better remember my umbrella. The other scenario is on your right. There's a car kind of immersed in some snow. And this beautifully depicts what my first driving experience was like back home. My father was taking me out for a little road test before my driver's examination at the age of 16. In Canada, at the age of 16, we are licensed, as long as we pass our test. And so my father said, look, the best thing is to drive in a snowstorm, because if you can drive in this inclement weather, you'll be fine for the test, because they've actually cleared the roads, they're plowed. And so I thought, okay, this is really good. I was doing well. My father was sitting next to me until I hit a snowbank, and I started to panic. I didn't know what to do, and I actually took my hands off the wheel. And I was in such a state of stress and panic. I was in this over-aroused state that my father gently put his hand on my shoulder and said, don't worry, you're going to be absolutely fine. I've hit snowbanks in my lifetime many times. Everything is going to be okay. And so it's the ability of this man to co-regulate me, because I certainly didn't have the self-regulation capacity. I was stressed, I was nervous, my car had just nosedived into a snowbank, and I thought my dad would be upset about the damage to the car. I didn't expect him to say everything's going to be okay. So the long and short of it is, we need to learn to self-regulate. Children learn this from their caregivers, and it's called co-regulation. And I'm going to talk to you about how to develop this in children on the autism spectrum. You might want to think about your own self-regulatory strategies as I speak this morning, because we all have them. We don't necessarily think about what we do under stress and how we maintain our arousal levels. So self-regulation, a brief overview. According to Baumeister and Voss, self-regulation is the ability to attain, maintain, and change one's level of arousal appropriately for a task situation. Control your emotions, and to formulate a goal, monitor, and adjust one's behaviors. So if you hear the baby crying in the crib, you know, your heart rate might go up just a bit, But your automatic instinct is to pick up that baby and perhaps bring some vestibular movement to that child, start rocking them. You might start humming. You might want to provide auditory input, okay? You might provide tactile input by caressing the cheek. These are all responses. You're in a regulated state and you're trying to co-regulate that baby who could be crying because he or she is hungry, wet, overtired, a whole slew of reasons. How many of you have had the experience of multitasking? You're in the kitchen, you're possibly cooking, you're stirring something, you've got your child with autism beside you, pulling at your shirt, someone rings the doorbell, the phone is ringing at the same time, you've got all of this sensory overload coming in at once. What is your response? You know, which one do you attend to first? How do you regulate during those moments when you're in sort of overdrive, right? You're in this state of high arousal where you've got to attend to competing stimuli. So self-regulation in a nutshell helps us to navigate our way through various situations that encroach on all of these 5 senses at the same time. It's what allows us to multitask, make those split-second decisions, and maintain this harmonious balance within ourselves and with the people in our environment. Many of us do this naturally, but children with autism need to be shown how to do this. Within self-regulation, and this is the work from Stuart Shanker, we have 5 domains, and he's divided them to help us understand that it is a multi-step process where we have to think of the biological first, our body organization. Where do we understand our body in space, and how do we understand it? How do we contact the surroundings? How does our sensory system respond to the reverberating sounds in this room, for example, or the fluorescent lighting in the ceilings? Our emotional regulation domain. This is comprised of basic and complex emotions. The cognitive is comprised of our communication system, our receptive and expressive, our social, and I'm going to talk about this within the autism context. How is the child responding in an inclusive setting versus a reverse integration setting, where they're in a specialized class for kids with autism, and typically developing children are entering that environment? And how does the child respond during peer buddy time, when they're paired with other children, either with ASD or without? And the last one, which is most challenging, but a wonderful opportunity for you to think about, is empathy. How do we teach empathy to children on the spectrum? Can it be done? And what are the results that we get? So we know our 5 senses play an enormous role in this work. We have our sound system, our vision, our smell, our touch, our proprioception, and our taste. And the research tells us all of those initial months of interaction with the baby are crucial, okay? Babies are learning to self-regulate due to our emotional, cognitive, tactile responses with that baby. The sound of our voice, the singing, the cradling, the rocking, okay? So this is where it all begins in infancy, and it sets the foundation for our children as they move through the years. And this slide echoes what I've just been describing. Children with poor self-regulation have typically been seen in negative terms, as having weak self-control, for example. I'm not sure if anyone has seen that famous marshmallow experiment by Michelle, where the child sits at a deck table and the experimenter comes in and says, you can either have 1 marshmallow now, or if you wait 1 minute, I'll come back and I'll give you 2 marshmallows. It was a seminal study, instrumental in teaching us a great deal about self-regulation, because what they found at the age of 4 and 5, children who could wait for that second marshmallow showed longitudinally better outcomes educationally, professionally, personally. We know that many of our children on the ASD spectrum do have a difficult time with waiting. So what are the strategies we can employ to help? And I'll discuss some of those a little later. So why is it we need that different understanding of why these behaviors are occurring? Okay, why is the hand flapping happening? The toe walking, the eye blinking, the covering of the ears. Okay, why are we seeing what I like to call really surface behaviors? Okay, there is something else going on, and Dr. Brown beautifully reminded us that it all starts here. It's neurological, and for many of these children, it is out of their control. They don't realize that they're necessarily flapping their hands through the periphery and sort of staring at their fingers in space. And what is the significance of that movement for that particular child? Developmental neuroscientists have shared that by being regulated, we can move towards self-regulation. So we know that self-regulation is that ability to feel calmly focused and alert. When we're primed and we're calmly focused and alert, we're primed for learning. That's when the magic happens, okay? I want you to close your eyes for a minute, and I want you to think about the most recent stressful situation in your own life, and just think to yourself what you did to get through that stressful period, okay? What are the compensatory strategies you developed for yourself? And for some of you, that list is long. You know that you need to do a variety of things to get back into this homeostatic state. There's quite a bit you need to do to sort of regulate yourself back, okay? I know I'm still trying to adjust to the time change, and that's the biggest contender I have right now. I'm battling. I haven't had much sleep, and my body still wants to go to Toronto time. We're a 7-hour time difference, so a different time zone. But I know by day 4 or 5 I should be okay. It's going to take me a while to get there. So think about what you do. Now I want you to think about a child with autism. What is the child with autism doing when they're stressed? What are the behaviors, quote unquote, that you're seeing the child engage in, possibly as a sign of stress? So what does the research tell us? Well, we know that children with ASD have difficulties with selective, sustained, and shifting attention. Okay? I'll never forget one of my first schools was on a very busy street, and there was a child with autism, and I competed with all of those wonderful cars zooming by. He was drawn to that window, and I could be doing cartwheels, engaged, singing, musical. I would wear funny hats, anything to bring him back to me. But I wasn't as powerful as those moving vehicles outside my door. So what I started to do is actually have him create 3-dimensional cars within the classroom setting and try to bring them into my environment, okay, where we could work through something that's mutual and we could build it together. So really look at what those perseverations and interests are and try to tap in how you can make it reciprocal. Bring it to your world so that there's a shared point of interest between the two of you. We also know that kids with ASD have difficulties with inhibitory control. So that's the ability to focus on relevant stimuli in the presence of irrelevant stimuli. Working memory, cognitive flexibility, which is that mental ability to switch between thinking about 2 different concepts and to think about multiple concepts at the same time. And planning and organization. And this comes from the work of Gomez and Barrett. They also found that children diagnosed with ASD displayed more self-regulatory difficulties at 1 year of age than did a comparison group. And in addition, 86% of parents reported that their children exhibited these self-regulatory difficulties. I have a PhD student currently working on developing a scale to measure self-regulation in kids with autism across the 5 domains. We've got the work of Stephen Porges, amazing work. He looks at the biological, but what we're trying to do is create a more holistic scale that measures all 5 in the ASD population. And I feel pretty confident to say she's working with a couple of colleagues of mine that within a year we'll have a scale that we could administer pre and post treatment to measure self-regulatory capacities in children with ASD. So I'm looking forward to sharing that in about a year's time. We also know that there's a scarcity of research into the social and emotional development of young children with autism, which is quite surprising, isn't it? Given that those with ASD actually exhibit social and emotional challenges with self-regulation quite early in life. Parents report this, up to the age of 1. Parents noticed that self-regulation was a big issue. So we have to start looking at self-regulation possibly as a diagnostic tool, not just as a measurement or planning tool. So the drawbacks of previous research, there's been this focus on behavior. But I would like to say that behavior is really a child's reaction to some kind of stimulus or stimuli, multiple, in the environment. And we're seeing either hypoarousal states or hyperarousal states. And how do we mitigate these? The past 15 years has been filled with neurobiological and psychological research that implicates biochemical and genetic influences in autistic behavior, and they're far more complex than the environmental variables that were tested early in the behavioral research. So we need to start looking at the recent data. So children with autism and self-regulation, what does this mean for us sitting here today? So what's been traditionally deemed as a behavioral response is actually a child's overreaction or underreaction in one or more of the sensory areas. These are the children that have difficulty forming systems. What I mean by systems are organized units of behavior. They have poor sensory motor coordination. They could have neurological challenges such as seizures, and that the salient properties of many sources induce repeated orienting. So what that means is they may be fascinated by the lines they see in a painting on a wall in your kitchen, for example. They might not be interested in engagement because they're strong in the visual, so they stare at something for a very long period of time. They're just quite fascinated by the patterns that they possibly see in something. Or they may be rocking all day, hand flapping. There could be kicking or biting oneself. These could be signs of stress. I'm going to share with you the case of Gregory, a child in my class who spent a long time rocking. I would place him in that hyposensitive category. He needed his engine revved up. He was hypotonic, quite floppy, and he was content to just rock in a chair if left to his own devices. And so when I brought the occupational therapist in, I said, look, we're trying here. We just can't ignite that spark. And she said, well, the first thing you need to do, he's certainly seeking some vestibular movement. He chooses the rocking chair. You want to replicate what he's doing, but with greater variability, faster, slower. So the first thing she suggested was to bring a platform swing into my room and to place him on it and to start doing some literacy and numeracy with him. And I have to tell you, the results were instantaneous. As long as he was rocking, and it had to be quite aggressive rocking, he actually learned to read. He was phonetically, phonologically aware. He started to string sentences together, and it also opened up his mathematical world. And some would argue, well, is this practical? Can you teach a child while moving all the time? Well, I can tell you, coming from Canada, there's been a movement in the last 6 to 8 months to bring spin bikes in the classroom. This is not just for kids with autism and ADHD. We're seeing the benefits of movement for all children. So they're installing these slant boards on the spin bikes, and children are given opportunities to cycle in the classroom while the teacher is instructing. And they're able to access those spin bikes whenever they feel they need them. This is what self-regulation is all about. If you feel you need to move, we're going to give you movement. The spin bike is there for you to use. If you feel you need just a little bit of rocking, well, we've got a SisselFit cushion for you where you can sit on that SisselFit and rock back and forth. Or you need some more dramatic movement, but you don't want to be on the spin bike, well, we can do something really interesting, and we can actually saw off the legs of some of your chair to give you that little bit of movement while you're in the classroom. There's so many things we can do environmentally So what we're starting to see is the integration of sensory rooms in the classroom. No longer is the child with autism shuttled down a hallway. You know, the child needs the sensory room, we're seeing behaviors. We're not treating the child as an individual exhibiting behaviors. We're treating the child who has sensory responses, either in overdrive or underdrive, in the classroom, and we're building microenvironments. We're bringing the items from the sensory room into the inclusive classroom. We're providing movement, opportunities to access squeeze balls, rain sticks, and we're seeing wonderful results, not just for kids with ASD, kids with ADHD, kids with learning disabilities, okay? And really for all kids. Just a personal story, my daughter has ADHD, she's in grade 5, and she is working with a very traditional teacher this year. She's also an accomplished gymnast, and if I took gymnastics away from her, we would be in trouble as a family. She says to me every day, "Mommy, why does the teacher next door allow her students to sit on physio balls at the desk, and my teacher demands that we sit in chairs?" And she'll say to me, she will articulate, "Mom, if I only could move throughout the day, I find I'm holding it in. I'm fidgety, I just want to get up, and I don't have opportunities to do that." And she'll walk by the classroom next door, the kids that need it. That's the key, is teaching children that they can access it when they need it. They're working away, they're in this balanced state of being calmly focused and alert, they're bouncing on their physio balls, and they're doing their work. So it's really educating teachers to come on board to understand what self-regulation is. And I did bring the book with me that's been published. It's making its way in Canadian classrooms by Stuart Shanker on self-regulation and how to teach those skills. So within the ALIA Center, I'm going to try to bring this back to you on a personal level. Self-regulation begins with relationships among 3 key individuals. The child that enters your classroom, the parent, the family that the child is surrounded by, and you, the teacher. You make a difference. Okay, so it really begins with this beautiful, sorry about that arrow there, that's covering up. And eventually it moves to including other children in the classroom, siblings that that child has, other adults in the child's life, perhaps a grandparent, other children. I think I mentioned that in the classroom. You can see how complex this becomes. This is why sometimes parents will approach the teacher and say, "These are the things I'm seeing at home," and the teacher might say, "Well, I don't see this in this environment." Children will respond differently in different environments. Every year I say to my daughter's teacher, "Is she showing hyperactivity, inattention, impulsivity?" And the answer I get is, "We don't see it." The reason being is she's learned to hold it together at school, but when she comes home, she's the child doing cartwheels down the hallway, and then she'll do a math question, and she'll go down the hallway and do another 3 cartwheels before she tackles the next math question. This is how she does her mathematics. We heard a wonderful message from Dr. Brown this morning about stress, and I'm going to spend the next few slides talking about stress and the implications of this for self-regulation. When you look at the potential stressors that can affect our ability to self-regulate, there are numerous in life. Okay, so look at the classroom teacher dealing with a particular classroom space. Maybe you're in tight quarters, maybe you have too much space. When I began my career in teaching, I always thought a large room was wonderful, but I quickly realized with 8 ASD kids in my room, big space meant more opportunity to run away from me and not necessarily to work with me. I can see teachers laughing in the audience who've gone through this. So I realized quickly we needed micro-environments. We also needed our time for outdoor play, but we needed smaller micro-environments to really get in that child space. Schedules can be a stressor for teachers, right? Their expectations, accountability, outcomes. What is the child achieving? We've got to get through this. We have Ministry of Education standards. There's pressures there to prove that our program works. Individual education plans. I'm not sure exactly how they work here in Bahrain. In Canada, they take a long time. Support staff. Do you have enough support staff assisting you as a team leader? Maybe there's a stress around teacher-student ratio. The classroom dynamic. Maybe your classroom was going smoothly until you've got a new child who's entered and it has changed that dynamic completely. Think of the stresses that the child comes to your classroom with. Maybe they're overloaded in the sensory area, either hyper or hypo across the tactile, visual, and you're still doing that detective work. You're not quite sure what's triggering those sensory responses. Maybe it's a lack of sleep. And we also heard it this morning how important it is. Maybe it's that restricted diet. Is that child being fueled through proper nutrition? Well, if they have some sensitivities in terms of taste, and they have a very restricted diet, and parents try so hard to really expand to the 4 food groups, what are the implications of that? How does it manifest itself in the classroom? Communication. The stress that is endured by these students because their message is not understood. That's a potential stress for many of them. Okay? They want to relay that information to you. They want to tell you, I've got a stomach ache today. You know, I can't do somersaults during gym time, but they're unable to articulate that message to you. The difficulty forming and maintaining friendships. I've worked with many children with high-functioning autism that have said to me, I want to play with that group. I don't know how. How do I go in there to start it, to initiate that relationship, that reciprocal interaction? It's not knowing how. And that's a stress. That's anxiety for some kids. And for the parents, the economic implications of having a child on the autism spectrum. Your own quality of life. Your own change in friendships, perhaps lack of sleep. Your reaction to your child's reactions. These are all potential stressors to be aware of because they do impact your ability to self-regulate as a parent and to provide that co-regulation, and that certainly trickles to the child. I'm doing some research right now on the effects of stress in teachers working with the ASD population. And I'm currently at the beginning stages interviewing teachers internationally because I'm curious about teachers' understanding of stress in Asia, in the Middle East, and for students with autism. Because we know when the teacher is calmly focused and alert, she is primed to do that one-on-one or one-on-4 instruction. When you as the teacher are breaking down due to personal stress or the stresses in your classroom, we can't be effective for our students. But we know, and Stuart Shanker reminds us of this, some stress is actually great. And you might be saying to yourself, well, how can stress be a good thing? This is a wonderful scale, and some of you may have seen it before. We've got low, medium, and high stress along the bottom. And you've got the child who's in this sleepy state. And as he moves up, or she moves up that mountain, we've got alertness, optimal, anxiety, disorganization. You've got all these arousal levels. We all want to be at the top of that mountain all the time. So we know that some stress is actually a great thing. It energizes us, right? It gets those endorphins going. We get that little bit of a jitter, and then boom, we're off and we can function, we can do it. When we're on overload, high, we become anxious, disorganized, and our output isn't visible. Okay, we're breaking down. I am really concerned about the kids that I see in this underreactive state. And in treatment, these are the students I find particularly hard to rev up. It's easier to bring a child down. It's sometimes hard to rev up the system of a child who seems to be drowsy or in a sleep-like state. Because we know if they're sleepy, there's certainly no stress. They're tuning us out. They're about to close their eyes on us. Okay? What do we do? Well, think back to infancy. The child who is so sleepy, but you have to wake up that baby because it's time for a feeding. I quickly realized I'm not doing that. When the baby's asleep, the baby's asleep. When they give me the signal they're hungry, they'll cry. But some babies are always in this sleep-like state. And the pediatrician will say, you've got to wake up that baby. You know, open a window, splash a little bit of water on their toes, get them up, and then proceed to the feeding. So think about what you do for your kids with ASD that seem to be in this under-aroused state, under-reactive, and how we rev up their engines to get them primed for learning. And also think about our children at the other extreme that are in this high stress. What do we do? My bias is we always begin with families. Family is the social group into which we're born, ideally where growth and development are nurtured. We want to build on a family's strengths. A family belief system, family cohesion, and coping strategies can all have a major impact on how effectively family members are able to respond to the challenges of raising a child. The challenges experienced by the child don't exist in isolation. Understanding the whole family situation is highly important in examining the root causes of a problem and in developing appropriate responses. I've worked with many teachers at Alia that got terrific communication systems going with parents. It's those little messages like, we had family visiting last night, so-and-so did not get to sleep until midnight. Beware, your day will look very different tomorrow because of this. There's been a real trend in Canada to use Class Dojo. It's an app, I'm not sure if it's being used here, but it's instantaneous, and teachers will send messages to parents and vice versa. Okay, it's that instant communication, which is wonderful. And I highly recommend it if you're not using it, rather than waiting for a note to travel through the child's backpack or a phone call, because the reality is sometimes you can't leave your room to even answer the phone. The other thing I want to mention is the importance of parent anecdotes. Parents have so many anecdotes over the years, and even in reflecting on your own children in those years of preschool, signs, those red flags that you saw are so important. And ask your families, what are the things you saw that were different for this child, perhaps versus your other children? What did you share with the doctor? What are you seeing now after we've tried X, Y, and Z at school? Penelope McMillan, an adult with autism, recounts what her mother shared with her. As an infant and toddler, I rocked, I squirmed when she tried to hold me. I erupted frequently with horrific temper tantrums, screaming loud, kicking, scratching my face, pulling my hair, banging my head, and holding my breath. Parents play an integral role in the transition from home to school. Home visits, let's bring them back. When I grew up in Toronto in the 1970s, the teacher would actually come into the home to interview the family and would watch the child in their natural environment. This was part of the intake process. Due to funding cuts, they've done away with that process. But I'll tell you, when I began my teaching career, I asked the principal, I said, is there any way I could spend a week before school starts, just living 3 to 4 hours within that family dynamic, just to get a sense of that child within the context of family. It's extremely important, and I garnered a lot of information that way. Going back to parent anecdotes, and I like to share my own personal stories with my daughter Sophie, who's now 11. She's my first. My second daughter is 6. So the things I saw in Sophie to me appeared normal. I could not change her diaper. She would not lie on her back for more than 3 seconds. And I just brushed this off as a squirmy baby. She didn't start sleeping through the night though until she was 3. So I think that's kind of caused a little bit of my own sleep disturbances now. I frequently wake through the night. But the family doctor knew right away. She said, there's something going on here, being awake and alert and just ready to go at 2 a.m. after a long, busy day, there's something else happening here. So, and she was right. She knew the signs. She said, watch out for the following things. And diet has played a huge role in our family, trying to go organic, keeping her off white refined sugars. My trip to the Philippines, I discovered coconut sugar, And so when I'm baking, I use coconut sugar, and it's lovely and good for you. So, you know, taking additives, the food colorings, products that have a lot of dyes are out of her diet. Different for my second child, who's calm and doesn't have a compromised system. She's okay with some of those foods, but my older daughter, we see the negative effects of a high sugar, high carb diet. So it's lots of fruits and vegetables for her. What we want to see in our students and parents, I should say parents, is the high support, high demand. Dr. Miller found that parents who assume this stance are able to gain more functioning from their children, resulting in greater development for the child. So this is the parent who's verbally encouraging the child while providing just enough assistance. It's applauding the child's, their performance, and setting those slightly difficult tasks. Okay, Vygotsky would call this scaffolding. It's the parent who relinquishes support as the child can perform a task. Can the parent accurately forecast what the child can do and can almost do? And the parent adjusts their speech and posture to get with the child in different situations. That's the hardest, isn't it? It's that sustained reciprocal interaction that Stanley Greenspan talks about, floor time. Opening and closing circles of communication for a long period of time. It's tiring, it's taxing. This is why I share with parents the importance of bringing other siblings and other children on board to jump in and get into these circles of communication. In my role now, I work with teacher candidates about to be certified teachers in my area of special education. So I'll ask them, what do you think is needed to become a great teacher of children with special needs? Look at the person beside you for a minute and engage in a 30-second discussion. What do you think they say? What's needed to be a great special educator? I'm curious to hear what you have to say. So take a minute, or if you want to raise your hand and share, your hand went up. Communication. Communication, so effective communication. Anyone else? What do you think the teachers say? Yes?
The person is very patient.
Patient? Who agrees with her? Sorry?
You have to be creative.
Creative? Patient? Okay, patience is actually the answer. This is what they say, patience. They don't have enough of it, and they hope that somehow it'll grow over time. They'll develop it. And I say to them, patience is not that ability to wait, but it's the ability to keep a good attitude while you're waiting. Because anyone can really wait, but it's what your state, your mental state is like while you wait. I try to reframe their thinking. Patience is certainly needed, but what I think is most important is being a great detective and having empathy. Particularly when working with children on the autism spectrum when there are so many unanswered questions. Empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from within that other person's frame of reference. And it's that capacity to place yourself in another's shoes. Although you may never know what it feels like to have a system that's always on overdrive, or you may never experience the frustration of not being able to communicate a message. Just understanding biologically, neurologically what's going on for these children, and having that empathy is important, and also taking the time to be a great detective. Great detectives don't only look for answers, but they continuously ask questions. And I think if we always ask those questions, there's always, you're searching for hope, looking for new avenues, right? We're not only looking for answers, we're also looking to develop new questions. What can I do for this child now that he's 26? Okay, he's an adult, living in a community. What can I do? How can I be the vehicle of change and make his dreams become a reality? If I ask you today to reflect on your best teachers, what would you say they possessed? What did they have? What do you think? Think back to your own childhood. Who were some of your best teachers? What made them the best for you? If you had to really narrow it down to 3 or 4 words, what would those words be? Anyone want to share?
They listen to you.
Sorry?
They listen to you.
Okay, so good listeners. I like that one.
Understanding?
Understanding. Anyone else?
Being very passionate about this.
Ongoing support.
Being very passionate about this subject.
Okay, so going back to being patient. Passionate, I love that. Yes.
Approachable?
Approachable, also a great one. They're all very great and they're kind of circling with what I'm about to share with you. My teacher gave me the best gift of all, believing in me. It sounds quite simple, doesn't it? There's a fascinating study, I can't remember the team of researchers now, but they followed 2 groups of high school students. Longitudinally, one group, they had dropped out of high school by grade 10. And they interviewed this group years down the road. The other group were high risk in that same category, juvenile delinquents, but they stayed. They persevered through high school, made it to college. And they asked both groups a whole slew of questions around teacher attributes. The group that stayed in school all said it was really simple. There was one teacher that believed in them when no other teacher believed in them because they were always suspended, they were delinquents, they were in trouble. But there was the one teacher that found their gifts, believed in them, and encouraged them to stay in school. The other group did not find a connection, did not feel that their teachers believed in them, and they dropped out. Okay, they did later on, they were involved in petty crime. This is a really well documented study. I'm going to turn to the Miller method, and I know many of you in the audience have received training at the Alia School, others have not. I had the pleasure of working with Dr. Arnold Miller, who has since passed, for many years, and I spent time at his clinic in Boston, and I was trained in this wonderful cognitive developmental approach called the Miller method. It's structured, child-sensitive, it's a developmental approach for kids with ASD. Like so many interventions, though, it has not been researched extensively. There are only 2 or 3 studies looking at the effectiveness of the Miller method. When I did my master's work, I looked at a very small segment of the Miller method, the ability of the Miller method to serve as a peer buddy program between children with autism and typically developing kids. What I did is I took a component of the Miller method, which was sign language, and I taught typically developing kids how to sign so that they could interact with children on the autism spectrum. In a nutshell, the results were wonderful. What we found is that children with learning disabilities who had struggled with some of their own personal challenges in the school setting made for the best peer buddies. They stayed with us in that 1-year program, did not drop out. They persisted. They demanded that communication. There was a fire and a passion in them to want to work with those children. What we found were overachievers. Children who were gifted were easily frustrated by children with autism. And it's not that they were poor peer buddies, they dropped out of the study. They wanted nothing to do with it when they realized this was going to be tough work, but it's also very rewarding work. So keep an eye on the children in your classroom that show empathy, that determination to help the child with the ASD, who sort of have that glimmer of hope and that constant contact, and they're trying to build relationship. Those are the kids you want to really get into a peer buddy program. So the Miller method focuses on elevating the child, and I'm going to spend the next few slides talking about why we elevate the child. OTs love this work because it works on the motor system quite extensively. It embraces a systems approach, which means organized units of behavior and how that child interacts with objects in the environment. I've always embraced a teamwork approach. We know we can't work in isolation with these kids. We rely on our colleagues, our parents, other professionals in the field to sort of form this holistic approach to treatment. So we want that intensive, ongoing collaboration among the whole team. We also want to keep in mind a really funny acronym, but it's PLOP, Position, Location, Object, and Person. When you're working with a child with ASD, you want to keep in mind all of those 4 domains. You want to constantly be changing. So if the child with autism is able to label trains, cups, and bowls, in my room at this table, I want to make sure the child can do that down the hallway with Sally in the library. I also want to make sure the child can identify those items, not just in three-dimensional format, but in two-dimensional the next time he picks up a book that shows those drawings. So you're constantly thinking of So my 6-year-old came home and said, "Mom, that crackling fire reminds me of a spa. I'm having a moment. Can we set up a little spa at home?" So she's trying to bring some of what she's recognizing as a calming strategy into her own home environment when she feels that she's hyper-aroused. That's what self-regulation is. We want our kids to be able to tell us, "I'm hearing my internal state. I don't feel well right now," or "I feel tired. I do need to put my head down." Or "I'm hungry. I do need to ask for food, even though it's not snack time. I'm thirsty." So moving away from kids can only have snack at 10:15 to maybe having some food available. Some children need to fuel themselves not every 90 minutes, but maybe every 30 minutes. Having water readily available at the table so that our children can drink more frequently. Sometimes that's all we need. It's those slight adjustments. So also working with one EA, one-on-one, to really working with groups of other children. That's key. You've got the work of Wolfberg, who does the IPG, the Integrated Playgroups model, which is lovely. And there are others, Paula Kluth's work. Get kids with other kids. As much as we think that we're great play partners as parents, you watch a group of children naturally play. They're inventive. They change the rules of the game. They make it interesting. They add other objects. We can never really replicate the play that we did as young children. We still play as adults. We play in different ways. We're playing cards. We're playing board games. You might play basketball. You're on a men's league or a women's league. The play changes. But the natural play of children is such a beautiful time in childhood. You want to capture that, and you can capture it by including other kids in the play. Oftentimes in schools, it's the kids with ASD that have a delayed entry model, and I've always felt that this was backwards. Why are they the last ones to come into a room 3 weeks after all the other kids have started? They're now walking into an environment with 15 other children, having to negotiate all those relationships. Everyone else has had that opportunity to become acclimatized to the environment, but the child with ASD has a delayed entry. They should be the first person. So they should be coming in. School for us usually starts the 3rd or 4th of September. They should be the ones coming in that last week of August, spending an hour on the first day, 2 hours when there aren't any children, and then slowly trickling the rest of the class in, so that they have a chance to start to form a few relationships in smaller groups, because a large group of 20 children can be daunting for the child with ASD. We want to move from structure. Although we know structure is important, I think sometimes it inhibits our children. We become really set with certain schedules and structure to becoming a little bit more flexible, putting your lesson plan away some days and saying, I'm going to follow the child's lead. I'm going to take their lead today. Let me see where the learning takes me. This is the work of Greenspan and Weeder, Floor Time DIR. Follow that child's lead. It's more of an inquiry-based model. So if the child is really focused on a fan in your room, well, let's bring other fans into the room. Let's start labeling the fan with flashcards. Let's try to break down the word fan. Let's take out a book from the library on fans. Let's watch a movie about fans. You can see how this can grow into sort of this huge inquiry-based project. We also want to move from this sense that curriculum steers our learning with predetermined goals and objectives. So if you have a child with autism who's 9, who's developmentally functioning as a 5-year-old, we want to move away from saying, okay, I've got the curriculum here for 5-year-olds. That child's got to move through every milestone in literacy, in numeracy, in social studies, in science. We want to move away from this sort of, I've got to get it all covered, into self-regulation steers our learning. If we pay attention to the sensory systems of our children and they're calmly focused and alert, they're going to be primed for the academic learning. 30 minutes? Thank you. So what do we do with the child with ASD that's so involved with an object that they're quite unresponsive to what's happening around them? So it doesn't matter that 2 children are engaged in a ball game and they're calling the child with ASD to join. That child's so far. How do you respond? How about the child who can't shift from one object or person to another? Those transitions are difficult. Or if they can't expand the nature of their involvement with an object, you want the child to take those cars and drive them along a track. You want to cause an accident and see what the child does when 2 cars crash. You want that child to drive the car into the garage. So parenting and teacher strategies here, they really aren't that different. You want to follow the child's lead sometimes. You want to get down on the ground and get silly. Be dramatic, be exaggerated in your gestures as much as you can be. Play, play, play. Reciprocal play, social dramatic play, playing with objects. Rough and tumble, okay? Throw the child up in the air, provide that vestibular movement, some spinning if the child can tolerate it, going through tunnels and tight spaces. We also want to continue to build relationships. I'm going to skip this slide, we discussed it. So our children who are underreactive, we know they need their engines revved up. When I showed you that stress performance scale, that hill, these are our kids that are almost in a sleep-like state. Okay, we want to fire them up, do lots of interrupting, and you want to quicken up the pace of your instruction. Okay? Put them on a Bosu ball. Don't be afraid to cut one of the legs of the chair. Saw off an inch or 2. Get that movement going. Get the juices flowing. You want to certainly have the repetition continued, lots of drama and excitement with that child. Our children who are hypersensitive or very overreactive, okay, these are our kids with ADHD, our kids with ASD, sometimes our kids with behavioral and conduct disorders show certainly signs and they fall into the same category. Sometimes it's associated with seizures, not always, and they're so overreactive to events that the child's being constantly pulled from one thing to another. It's not that the child with ADHD can't focus. They're focusing on everything in this room, for example. The crumb that's on the floor, the edges in that wall, the woman at the back of the room who's on the phone, the camera that's going, the reporter who's here. They're focusing on everything that they can't pay attention to your lovely face as they're trying to engage in conversation with you. So they have difficulty learning because of this. What are the things we're seeing that continue to work for these kids? A calm environment. So for my daughter with ADHD, the years that she's had teachers that are kind of bubbly and sort of overreactive all the time, it hasn't necessarily been a good thing for her. She needs someone that's calmly focused and alert, because when she's sky high, when she has someone instructing her that's using a calm tone and repeats the instructions and says to her, tell me what you need to do. What's the first thing? What's the second thing? What's the third thing? Then Sophie knows what she needs to do. No different for the child with ASD. If you see them in this hyper-aroused state, you have to bring yourself down. And that's hard to do because I would say it's those mirror neurons. You see someone doing that, your inclination is to do those same things. You've got to breathe and bring yourself down. And sometimes it's hard to do because the behaviors, those responses are quite erratic. And sometimes they're scary. Maybe the child is coming at you. You've got to maintain that sense of calm. So we know that classical music helps. We know dimming the lights. I still love to work in the dark. I don't do well with lights personally. Soft voice, yoga. What I have found effective for the 26-year-old that I'm working with is massage. I take him to a local massage clinic, and what I'm doing now is while he's being massaged, I bring in mathematics so that it's happening at the same time. His massage therapist is totally fine with it. So we're not using massage therapy as an escape, an isolated therapeutic practice. I know massage is calming him down, so guess what? That's when he's primed for learning. I'm going to get in there with mathematics, and we're going to work through some problem solving together. So as he's lying down, I'm on the other side, and he has his notebook right in front of him. It's no different when a child goes into a sensory room. We have snooze-in rooms in Canada, and they're state-of-the-art, $200,000 to $300,000 to build them. It's a very, the word I'm looking for, if the child is just going to the sensory room as an escape, is that effective practice? If we know it's calming for the child, bring in some of your own agenda, your own academic goals for that child into that sensory room, into the snooze-in room, and that's where you do the work. Because you're targeting those senses, the child's calmly focused and alert, and you're bringing in worksheets, flashcards, whatever it is that you're doing with the child during that time. When we think of the biological domain, this is the integration of sensory input, and we know it's tough for these children to integrate their vision, their hearing, their tactile, their proprioception. But we know that once sensory integration starts to happen, it does lead to the development of body efficacy, body schema, intention. Once we're calmly focused and alert, self-regulation in the biological domain means we can recoup our energy after difficult experiences. It means we have a robust immune system. Okay, so we're physically quite healthy. We have sufficient energy when we wake up in the morning, and that's maintained throughout the day. We're not seeing sort of these peaks and valleys. We're engaging in physical activities and we're enjoying them. Look for your kids with autism that can do that. And again, OTs play an integral role here. Body efficacy is the sense that the body is subject to the child's control and that they're capable of influencing others and causing an effect on their world. So this is the child, give the child heavy cans to lift, pushing heavy objects. Flip the table over and ask the child for help to pick up that table. This is working the body efficacy, the understanding that they have the power to manipulate the environment. It's their hands causing a change in that furniture's location. Body schema is the formation of a concept of the body that makes it possible to sit, to run, to jump, and to have those intended actions towards objects. It's directly related to your body's boundaries, and we can learn to extend our body schemas beyond our body's boundaries. So for the low-functioning child with autism, we always start teaching within a few feet of their immediate body. As the child, so think of a baby, think of a toddler, their immediate environment, and then we slowly start to move away. When I'm working with a child who hasn't quite developed that sort of understanding of body efficacy, I'm very close to them. When they start to understand their own body, I'm moving steps away, and I'm expanding the distance between myself and the child, and other children. The cognitive domain of self-regulation is the ability to focus and switch your focus as this is required. And it's that consideration of the perspective of others, understanding cause and effect, and planning and executing several steps in a row. So if the child needs to get their own drink at snack time, do they know to go to their lunch bag, open it up, pull out their snack, open it up and start to feed themselves? Here's a very sort of simple example. The emotional domain is the ability to modulate those strong emotions. You know, you might be feeling angry, and that's okay, but how are you expressing it? What's acceptable and what's unacceptable? Do you have that emotional resiliency, ability to recover from disappointment in challenging situations? How long does it take for your child with ASD to recover from a tantrum? 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or is it going on for about an hour? I've got Plutchik's gradations of emotions here, and there's a whole gamut of them, and it sort of forces us to pay attention to not just happy, mad, sad, but there's a whole slew of emotions that our children with ASD experience. So we have to start to think beyond those 3 basic emotions that we tend to think of as
Pensiveness and admiration, tolerance, acceptance, timid.
The social domain of SR, one of my personal favorites, it's that attachment and bonding, and it starts with the family. Awareness of people being distinct from objects, distinguishing themselves from others. So we don't teach personal pronouns, I, you, he, she, until the child is fully aware. And how do we do that? Well, we begin with the name. So that's Gregory, I'm Sonia, so on and so forth. We always use first names. Personal prepositions come in much later. It's understanding their own feelings, the feelings and intentions of others, and recovering from breakdowns in interactions with others, not within themselves. And for higher functioning children, children with Asperger's, for example, pro-social domain is an effective one to work on, and that's empathy, and it's the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. It's that incidental teaching of empathy. The way I do this is I purposely plan a fall. I've done this many times. It's demonstrative. I'll be walking in the classroom. All of a sudden, I'll fake my own fall and start screaming for help. And I look to see who's able to come and rescue me. It's amazing. Some of the children right away run for the first aid kit. Some will run for a Band-Aid. Come and show that empathy. Others will look at me kind of thinking, okay, what's wrong with her? She's screaming, and they'll walk on by. They're not quite there yet. They notice something's different. The child who's further away from that stage may turn to the sound source, which is me, but then may continue on with their own activity, okay? We want to build empathy by setting up situations where we're pushing kids to actually become empathetic. Sometimes they're contrived situations. We also want them working with other children where they're more natural situations. So we're nearing the end, and I'll save some time for questions. But we want to rethink behavior in autism. One child may run out of the room every day to escape the sound of a sharpener or a fan, whereas another may run because of an intense need to move and be active. Teachers are encouraged to be aware of behavior as a sensory response. A long-standing tradition in the field of autism is to eliminate or change behaviors deemed challenging by us as professionals. With new research and information on the role of sensory integration, dysfunction, and self-regulation, we're contesting this behaviorist paradigm. We're suggesting new ways to cope with so-called behaviors by providing environments that really pay attention to the child's sensory needs. And this has become a preventative measure. Parents and professionals sometimes use words to suggest that the behavior, such as the screaming and the hand flapping, the head banging, are always located inside the students. What I'm saying is that surface behavior can't be set or considered separately from programming, instruction, learning, relationships. It's all connected. We have to pay attention to those triggers, those quiet stressors in the environment that we may not really think could be a stressor, but they are a stressful event for the child with ASD. All behavior is also interpreted and perceived differently by individuals. Everyone in this room will perceive a behavior differently based on your own experience, your own training, your understanding of autism, your philosophical views, and perhaps your institutional policies are guiding the way you respond to behavior. Again, the child flicking their fingers may be doing this to actually tune out an outside noise. A child who spins or drops a pencil may have developed this as a coping mechanism to relax or calm down. My daughter used to do that to get movement within her day. She would intentionally drop things so she could bend down, turn over. Look for the kids that, with ADHD especially, that'll say, I'll go to the office and bring down the attendance, or, I'll go to Mrs. So-and-so's room to pick up the paper for you. A child who's refusing to look at you in the face may be doing so in order to listen to his own words more carefully. A child who rocks back and forth when seated for long periods of time may find it comforting, or they're signaling to you that they need a movement break.
So some questions to ask yourself.
If the child with ASD exhibits behaviors, the immediate response might be to extinguish that behavior by saying, no flapping, or put your hands down. What can we do for the individual who's constantly hand flapping with loud vocalizations and pinching? Well, the first thing you have to do as a detective, you've got to ask some questions. When is the child doing the hand flapping? In which environments? With which individuals? Are there any environmental triggers? What's the child's emotional state during that time? Are they angry? Are they happy? Are they excited? What alternatives can be provided for the child to channel this hand flapping in positive ways? Why is the behavior deemed problematic? Who's it problematic for? Is it a problem for everyone in your environment? Vestibular movement and self-regulation. Vestibular processing refers to that information that's provided by the receptors in our inner ear. It's the input we receive tells us where we are in relation to gravity, whether we're still or moving, how fast we're going, and in which direction. Some of the characteristics we see in our children that indicate the need for movement, for example, is the child who doesn't like to be upside down. The child who's fearing their feet leaving the ground, running about quickly, toe walking, fear of going up and down the stairs, erratic arousal levels, rapid head shaking. There was a child I worked with, maybe it was my second visit at Alia, and she wouldn't go up the stairs. And I was watching her, and she would shuffle, and she would look at the stairs, looking up, and they seemed daunting to her. You could see the look of terror on her face. And so there was a handrail on one side, and my suggestion was we needed to put a broomstick or a handrail on the other side. She needed support, left and right brain, to get both hands on that railing to make her way up. The other thing she needed is a little bit of a tap, proprioceptive input underneath the soles of her feet. Shoes and socks off, give that little nudge so that she could start to alternate and make her way up. She was much better going downstairs than she was going up the stairs. But with some gentle prodding and that slight accommodation of providing that second handrail, she did it. It was quite a joyous moment to see her smile as she made her way up those stairs. Tactile hypersensitivity. So these are our kids that are withdrawing from paint and glue in the classroom. They have behavioral overreactions with tactile responses. These are our kids that don't like haircuts. They're very hypersensitive. They want nothing touching the ears or the face. They dislike their hair being washed. They don't like their baths or their cutting of the hair. They prefer certain clothing or textures. They prefer certain food textures and certain temperatures. One thing I didn't mention with Harrison, and I talked about him now at the age of 26, what's been exciting for me, his diet was comprised of primarily apples as a young boy. And I remember the family saying, what are we going to do? He could eat 20 to 30 apples in a day, and that was it. That's all he wanted. And now, he's eating avocado, he's eating nuts, he's eating pasta, just about everything. And so that took a long time. You know, he might eat an apple now, but the obsession with apples and that need for sort of that tart taste went away over time. Parents have asked, well, what do you think you did? What was it? He had so many interventions going at the same time. It's difficult to say, was it one thing or was it maturational development? Over time, he learned to, you know, did we activate his olfactory? Let's smell the food before we ingest it. You know, maybe if he takes extra time to smell it, to look at it, to read about food. We would YouTube clips about different foods and kids preparing food. What was it exactly? But it was something because he started to bring in more foods into his world. Hyposensitivity, these are kids that are touching things all the time. Okay? They might be putting things that are inedible in their mouths. There's a difficulty transitioning away from these tactile activities, and they're seeking out deep pressure. They might be intentionally bumping into other children or furniture. And they can be self-injurious. Okay? They want to sort of, they're causing that injury because it's a tactile hypo-response. You know, I've got to sort of feel, am I really there? And they don't even recognize their own strength at times. What we have found works, again, think of massage, but don't think of it in isolation. When the child's having a massage, bring in your own agenda. Bring in some work for the child to do. Brush the child. The Will Barker protocol has been effective. Okay, get out those nail brushes, brush the child. Use those massage vibrators for these kids. Definitely works. Okay, and sometimes just rubbing a child's back. Experiment with clothing. I was reading online last night, there's a new clothing company in Texas. They've launched a full clothing line for kids with autism that are experiencing tactile sensitivities. Proprioceptive, heavy work. I talked about this earlier. Lifting things, pushing things, turning things over, extremely important. We didn't talk much about the vision system, but you'll see it in many of our children, and that comes in the way of limited eye contact, lots of blinking and squeezing of the eyes, squinting, covering their eyes possibly, looking at objects for a long period of time, skipping lines, words when reading, etc. What I'm starting to do now is using an app with the child or the adult I work with who is fascinated by Disney, sequencing events online. He knows exactly when those slides happen in a film. So working through beginning, middle, end by reorganizing the slides in a Disney film and understanding, you know, what the climax of the story is, what the introduction was. And it's enticing because it's Disney, so we use it absolutely. As much as I'd love to expose him to some of the other literature I've tried, his passion is still Disney, but that's okay because Disney continues to produce new films. So now the focus has been Zootopia, the material changes. Auditorily, you might see the kids covering their ears. Use those earplugs, use the headphones sporadically, see how that works. Work with echoes with children. Harrison is one of those children. We've experimented in the forest, listening to our voice reverberating as we echo or shout something out into the world, and we hear the sound coming back at us. Experiment with sounds in your room. And you may want to use a microphone. FM systems are particularly effective for some kids. The use of tennis balls underneath the chairs if the chairs are making lots of noise in the classroom. There's a great company called Hush Ups that produces the tennis balls, and they're already cut for you to place underneath the legs of chairs. Last two slides, time in versus time out. Time out shouldn't be used in the traditional sense. Using time out as a punishment is somewhat unacceptable when we think of the profile of kids with ASD who are so isolated at times, and sort of putting them in a timeout situation further isolates. Now, there are all these situations where if the child is injuring themselves or in danger to others as a short term, we may need to respond this way. But start to think long term. What I have found for myself as a professional is often I need the timeout. I need to step away, regroup and think, okay, what am I doing wrong here? Something's not working. I've got to get back in the zone and go back, okay? That's important. Because the hallmark of autism is that social piece. right? And you said it so beautifully earlier, Dr. Brown. We want to build that relationship, that social circle for the individual. Timing them out is just moving us further away from that. We need teams, we need people. So when we think of the ingredients we need to make this work, we've got to change the children we're working with. We grow as professionals when we work with children of all skills and abilities. We want to pay attention to the environment, the visual stimuli, the auditory stimuli, the olfactory triggers. We want to do those team building exercises with the professionals that we're working with. Bring in those case studies. Try to problem solve with other teachers down the hallway, perhaps who haven't worked with that child. What would you do if Johnny was in your room? Lots of communication with the teachers, with parents, ongoing back and forth. The field is changing so quickly. I've heard of new research today that I had not heard of. I subscribe to many of the leading autism journals. This was new information. I am really excited to bring it back home as well. But keep up to date as much as you can. You know, subscribe to some of those journals online. Sometimes social media circulates really great research as well. This is a case of the randomly aggressive child. It was a child I work with. It was published in the Journal of Play Therapy, actually. They picked up my case study and said they'd like to publish it. Some children, without any provocation, decide to strike out. We can't figure out why. They're hitting us. They're hitting other children. I had a child that was like this, aggressive all the time. With the help of Dr. Miller, he said to me, Sonia, he has very poor awareness of his own body. He's not hitting us. He doesn't dislike you. He's not angry. He's just experimenting with how far he can go. What happens? And over time he realized, when I'm doing this, the eyebrows change of the people in my environment. I'm hearing screaming. I'm hearing new sounds. I'm seeing people crying for the first time. This is actually quite cool. I'm going to keep doing it because I really love to see the exaggerated expressions of the people in my environment. This was Dr. Miller's interpretation, and he used to video conference with me. He moved the camera in my room twice a week. We videotaped these sessions. I'm going to spend my sabbatical writing a book about this because I've got many case studies, but I want to provide practical responses, strategies that teachers can use, and parents. He said to me, we've got to place him on rollerblades. His first question was, does he know how to rollerblade? I said, no. And he said, well, that's a good thing. Place him on rollerblades because the next time he tries to strike out, he's going to destabilize himself. He's going to take the fall. And my first reaction was, that's so cruel. How could we do this to him? And he said, talk to his family, get them on board, make sure your principal is in agreement, who at the time was Connie Gale, and she said, sure, do whatever. If it's going to work, do it. Ronnie was laughing. So I said, please, we've got to put him in a helmet, shin pads. He could get hurt. It was miraculous. The first time he tried to strike out, and first thing that happened was he started to fall. What it did is it bought us enough time so that he could stay in school and that he could learn how to build relationships with people that were within 1 to 2 feet away. Because when he was on his feet, he would get quite close to you and boom, he would come at you. But this caused him to be so aware of his body and his movements. Every time he tried to strike out, he would fall. We found over time he developed friendships. He also got really good at rollerblading, and that was our worry. But what we decided to do is place his peers on rollerblades, and we made it a reciprocal activity and built it on his schedule. So when he would do his math, right after he would have rollerblading time with a friend, which then turned into we're going to hold hands and rollerblade around the school. It became enticing for him, and he got really, really good. So there was a story. It started off as a negative, but turned into a wonderful, social, engaging, motor activity. The language of us versus them. We like things, they fixate on objects. Paula Kluth's work, she reminds us of this. We've got to be careful. We try to make friends, but they're displaying attention-seeking behavior. We take breaks, they display off-task behavior. We stand up for ourselves, they're non-compliant. We have hobbies, but they self-stim. We choose our friends wisely. They display poor peer socialization.
We persevere, but they perseverate. We like people. They have dependencies on people. We insist, but they tantrum. We change our minds. They are disoriented and have short attention spans. We have talents, but they have sprinter skills. It's all about perspective, perceptions, and our own attitudes that we bring to the environment play a key role. Just a closing reflection for you to think about on your own. And it's a beautiful reminder that every child is different. Every child will grow and learn at their own pace. But if we believe in our children, they will get there at their own pace, in their own time, within their own realm of possibility. And I love this quote. I share this with teachers all the time and parents. And it's that understanding that it really is all about our own attitude and perceptions. My last slide has a couple of references for you to think about. And I thank you for your time. I think I probably only have like 60 seconds for one question or maybe two. But thanks so much for sitting for such a long period of time. Thank you.